Weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live. Weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C. Brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C. Brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development. Not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation. Empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation. Empathy and inspiration. Biz Dev Live. Weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live. Weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C. Brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C. Brought to you by Cameron T.
Welcome. Today on this program, I have Arcane. Now, and I didn't ask you the last name before we got on Arcane, but Arcane Antoine.
Antoine.
All right. Arcane Antoine, a proud native of New Jersey. His parents immigrated from Haiti and helped instill him in a strong work ethic, laying down a strong foundation of faith in God and love for the community. He is a passionate, dedicated, hardworking man of faith who loves to work with others to find progressive and transformational solutions to systemic issues that deny people, especially poor and working class families, their freedom, rights, liberties, and human dignity. Arcane originates from a long family tradition of service to those in need of help. His brother is a pastor who dedicates his time to caring for the homeless and encouraging, through supportive measures, those fighting drug addictions. His sister is a tireless advocate for suicide survivors, as well as those who struggle with mental health illnesses. All of this uplifting and supportive work stems from a long legacy of watching their mother taking young women who are kicked out of their homes and providing them with much needed assistance that enabled them to finish high school. Currently, he is a licensed minister of St. Matthew's Baptist Church in Roselle, New Jersey. For 10 years, Arcane Antoine has been the principal strategist for Savviors, a public strategy firm providing strategic guidance to businesses, public officials, government institutions, community organizations, and faith leaders. He encourages people to be more civically and politically engaged in standing up, speaking out, and taking moral action. Arcane received his bachelor's degree in law and justice studies at Rowan University, his master's degree in corporate and public communication at Seton Hall University, and pursuing a master's of divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary. He has taught at Kean University as an adjunct professor in the communication department. Arcane, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for doing this for me.
Hey, thank you for having me on the show, and I really appreciate it.
So I know I just did the deep dive into the bio there, but tell us, what you're doing right now. I know, your career has, you've run for mayor of Roselle, right?
Yeah.
You're deeply active in the community. I encourage you just to talk to us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and then we'll kind of get into what's going on in today's political environment.
Again, I just want to thank you for having me on the show. Just a little about myself. Well, you ran down the whole bio, but the reality is I'm a person who is deeply committed to helping improve the lives of people all over the world, starting in my own town in New Jersey, in my state, and my own town in Roselle and the state of New Jersey. Ever since I was a young kid, I've always had my heart always broke whenever I saw people suffering, crying, going through their pains. And so I didn't know what that meant. And so as we went through I went to college, I studied, and I thought I wanted to go into corporate America. But then I always just kind of felt like there was a bigger burden of the world that was on me. And I felt like God was trying to speak to me and encourage me to be a part of the solution. And so that's where I decided to kind of drop all the path of going into corporate America, trying to work for a pharmaceutical company, and to working with kids who were homeless. And the more I tried to do, quote unquote, the good thing and help the homeless and feed the homeless and mentor, I just realized that you are washing your hands and then you're dirtying your hands. You're washing your hands and you're dirtying your hands. And for me, it was just like, how do we get down to the core of helping folks so that it's not that constant process? And that's what led me. It was a Catholic priest and a Baptist minister who pulled me to the side one day, and they said, hey, we need you to really understand these issues. And it's not just about individual help, but it's about systemic help if you're really trying to get hard to the root of the solution. And that was on a 10-year journey for me. And I became an organizer. And for me, it was all about how do we get down to the core of providing relief to the people who are in the middle of the pain. And the last thing I would say is it's not me coming in with a savior's complex and trying to help people. But for me, a lot of their pains were my pains. I understand what it means to grow up poor. I understand what it means to feel that you're isolated, marginalized. I understand what it means to go through a level of police terror and violence. These were happening all throughout my community as a child. And so as I got older, I had the opportunity to go to school, get access. So now it's time for me to give back. And that's what I've been doing through advocating for legislation, organizing communities, and speaking out against injustice.
And again, before we jump into kind of what's going on in the political environment, so what are some things that you've done, through Savviors, through your position in the church, through the community where you've seen some successes in the past?
I would just say as an organizer, I've had the opportunity to work with so many faith leaders and community leaders around different issues in New Jersey. When we talk about equity, we talk about the inequality between poor and wealthy. New Jersey is, I think, ranked the number one state in the union where the disparities between the wealthy and the poor. We have some of the wealthiest towns right next to some of the poorest towns, and these are across the board, even in the nation. And so we were able to bring one of the most progressive school formula fundings, so that in 2000, I believe 2008, it was passed, and which made sure it was an equitable process with making sure that poor kids were not disfranchised and they had money behind them. Also worked on issues more recently around police, independent prosecutor. Normally when an officer is charged with a killing, a local body would investigate that. But we passed legislation in 2008, 2009 that said, and then the AG's office of New Jersey would now take over those cases, so there will be a little more independence. Worked around issues of immigration and documented, where we be able to support families who are just suffering. I mean, across the board, whether you talk about federal transportation, I've worked on a whole lot of issues and past issues from the local all the way up to the statewide, and then with other organizations on the federal level when it comes down to different bills around funding that helps people.
That's awesome. I mean, just, one of the reasons that our mutual contact, I reached out to Keisha King. I said, do you know somebody that, is really active around these issues? Because I know what I read, but I'm not, actively stomping and, I don't have my hat in the political ring, and that's you all day. Right. So I'm really appreciative of your input on what's going on right now. So let's jump right into it. Certainly when you were talking about the equitable funding for schools, my ears perked right up, because I know that that's a major issue, and it ties into a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today, because you have systemic racial injustice, not only in the form of unequal policing for different communities, but it starts earlier than that. It starts at the educational level. It starts at the opportunity that a young person receives. I've spent the last 24 years of my life deep in activism around education and providing young people working at A. Philip Randolph Campus High School in Harlem, providing opportunity. So, in my mindset, the mission has, the organization has a mission, helping socioeconomically disadvantaged children. But my way of looking at it is giving each young person the most opportunity possible. And there are a lot of communities that right from the gate, they seem set up not to have the same opportunities that other children, are automatically given because of the funding and resources that are provided to their schools. So that's major. That's huge. That you've put work into that. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah. So what I want to say is, as we seek solutions in our regions, in our states, in our own towns, I think people always need to make sure that they're continued to take into context of what happened. When we're talking about the Black community, remember when Africans who were enslaved, they were not taught. Part of the education process was removed because the uneducated folks was a fear of uprisings, and so
right, it was literally illegal to teach a slave how to read, right? Something along those lines.
Yeah. So then there was then as the times move on, as you can see, then Emancipation Proclamation, people started to have their own communities, and then you had desegregation where schools weren't equal, so you didn't have funding for teachers, the whole 9 yards. So when in America, you're talking about hundreds of years with people not even being able to have access to reading or to educate or formal education. So now we're in the situation where when we're seeing why the lag, why the behind, because structurally we prevented the Black community in America from educating, and economically. The reason, and people will say, well, why didn't they educate themselves? It takes money to educate yourself, to teachers and place the housing and feeding. And so a lot of the Black community was deprived of those economic opportunities as well. So these are reasons why.
Well, and let me just insert that whole pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing, where that's put on poor folks, but rich folks don't really pull themselves up by their own bootstraps if they're given all these resources and they're starting a race way ahead of any counterpart from any other economic or racial faction of the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's exactly what Martin Luther King addressed at one time. He said, people want to say, pull up themselves by the bootstraps, and there's no boots, to pull up anything. And also remember, this country has a long history of when European immigrants were coming in, the government was subsidizing them and making sure that they were giving them access to land and they were access to credit. And so they had their own struggles too, but it wasn't the same as Africans who dealt with centuries of the same structural issues put against them. And so right now, I want people to understand part of when you look at COVID-19, right? Who were the ones that were disproportionately sick? Who were the disproportionately dying? Black folks, right? We look at the educational system saying who's the disproportionately affected, right? We look at the criminal justice system. We say that the Black percentage only 13-14%, and we're the vast majority of numbers in the criminal justice system. You see this outline, and it's part of this long.
And going back to that statistic on the criminal justice system, because I think the feeling for somebody that's ignorant, well, there's more Black folks in jail because they're committing more crime, and that's absolutely untrue.
Absolutely, it's actually a ridiculous statement, and people don't study. When you look at, there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, after the Emancipation Proclamation, slavery was abolished, but there was still the 13th Amendment, which was for crime, right? So if you committed a crime, then these slave components will stay with you. Remember, slavery wasn't just about hate. It was an economic source for a lot of people. So in order for them to stay in power and to keep their capital, they had to make sure that people had free labor. And so that's what, if the criminal justice system and having people in prison would help them gain this property, because they would end up being able to put people to work. And on the other side of the issue,
which we're still seeing right now in the criminal industrial complex, yeah,
absolutely, you still have people who are working like you and I work, but they're getting paid. But the companies see you power, and so I also bring up the war on drugs. When you look at in the early 80s, right, in the Reagan era, this is when you had a booming of the criminal justice system and the mass incarceration as we know it, right? It started under Nixon, but then really took off even higher under Reagan. And that's when the numbers skyrocketed, right? And then one of the reasons you have that is because of the war on drugs. And that was a tailored process to pushing more police into Black and brown communities, and also making sure that you're arresting people and for straight up profits. I continue to tell people, these are not your movie prisons where you have the guard who's in the community and it's a government. These are private companies on the stock market who have shares and they make money. And we have to understand that every time there's a person in the prison system, our tax dollars are paying for that. And so there's an interest to dismantle these systems, because at the end of the day, you're bankrupting your own self. And I will say the last thing is this: even with the police department was a very localized system a very long time ago. It was volunteers, but as it became structured, one of the reasons it became structured the way it was because they were private security that protected companies and their interests and their products. Companies didn't want to take the burden anymore. And you know what they did? They created the taxpayer system to fund police. And that's still happening today. But do you realize there's nowhere in the Constitution that says that police officers are to protect individuals? No. That's why whenever there's a riot and there's all this other stuff, why? Police go to protect the banks and make sure that this is happening. So they're getting free service from the police department. And who's paying the healthcare? Who's paying the pensions? Who's paying the mental health? Who's paying all of these entities and the trainings and the suits and all the stuff? It's taxpayers. So even in the poorest of poor towns, you're still funding the police department, and the police department is still protecting the interests of very powerful companies.
Yeah, and I want to stress something, because I see the conversation in the social sphere right now. This is not a Republican versus Democrat kind of thing. Now, you will see in the media that right now, if you go on to the Trump White House thing, don't ask me why I was looking at that, but I was, where they're saying the crazy liberal, the radical liberal agenda is they want to get rid of cops. So now the Republicans are playing that against the Democrats, where they're going to be law and order Republicans, and then you got the crazy, just radical liberal Democrats. But this is not a Republican Democrat specific issue, because just watching John Oliver, from his episode on Sunday night, he's got, line after line from different speeches with Bill Clinton, supporting not only ramp up of police, but the prison industrial complex. And his speeches, this is a systemic political problem in the United States. Understandably, people want to feel safe. They are afraid, especially when they see riots on TV. It's sort of interesting because for certain audience members out there, and for certain people that are hearing this, 1 week it was, we don't want to stay at home. This is monarchy, or we're being ruled and told what to do, and it's not right. And then the next week, there's protests in the street, majority of which are peaceful, but there is some rioting here and there. And suddenly it's like, no, you're supposed to be staying at home. You're going to get COVID. So you have this juxtaposition of what's crazy in the moment based on somebody's fear, based on what they feel somebody is telling them, or where their political stance is. When you look at these issues, I'm assuming you're a Democrat when you were running, or maybe you were third party. What did you run as when you were going for mayor?
No, I'm a Democrat.
Okay, so I'm a Democrat as well, but I don't support high taxes. I think I have that in common with my Republican brothers and sisters, right? Fellow human beings, we don't want to be overly taxed. We want to feel like we're getting as much as we're giving. And certainly when it comes to police, I want to feel safe. But I also understand, as a man that has a biracial son, and as a man that, living in the Bronx for a time and only blocks away from where Amadou Diallo was shot with 41 rounds from police officers' guns, that a police presence and a heavy police presence doesn't always make me feel safer.
Yeah. So I think what we have to accept is that two realities can coexist, right? And so number one, in America, and these are broad terms and these are general statements in times, but in America, there's a vast experience amongst white folks where police are seen as a symbol of protection, right? There's been a long history of the cops coming, showing, maybe there's been some incidents, but it's sort of rational. It's like there's some logical stuff there. That's not the experience of Black folks in this country. The slavery, you see, again, let's talk about the solutions, but we have to provide context.
Yes.
The police department and the entity, what we describe as the police, was created during the time of slavery to stop uprisings. The whole purpose of the goal was to stop Black people from being free of being raped, being terrorized, being stripped of their dignity, right? So this was and then I want you to kind of think of this. How do you make people stop the uprising? You have to make people so afraid. And this is why when Black people refer to police terror, because there was such terror that had to be put in the lives of people that said, if you uprise, you're going to be killed. So let's remove slavery, right? Okay, let's just say we're past that. All right, let's move on. Do we realize that when Black people were starting to build their communities and they had their businesses, remember there was segregation at the time, so you had all Black neighborhoods, all Black doctors, engineers, oil. When white communities were mad at their success, they went into those towns, and sometimes they stole, they killed, and sometimes they burned down the whole town. When Black people went to protect themselves with their Second Amendment rights, it was the police that came in and stripped them of their right to protect themselves, which made it easier for white looters. Okay, well then let's move past that too. Let's not have a conversation about that. Do we realize that we had lynching in this country? You ever ask yourself, it wasn't private lynchings in people's homes, it was public. Why didn't it stop? The police were actually egging those lynchings on. They were very supportive of them. And my point is saying, if we go through history, you see this ongoing system of what a vast majority of our white brothers and sisters say, well, they're decent, good, hardworking police officers. And we, as Black folks that have understanding long history, it says, no, it's been a system of terror. And the last thing I would say is this. The FBI released a report on numerous occasions about white supremacists infiltrating local police departments all throughout this nation. And then you say, wow, why is that happening? Remember, we have to go back to 1915 or 1905 when Birth of the Nation came out as a movie. Birth of the Nation was the first time where Black people was depicted as evil and to be feared across the nation. It was the largest campaign run against Black people. When you feel that way, why are white people afraid of Black people? That was one of the first campaigns that were done. And it was so successful because it depicted white women are being killed by Black men and they had to be saved. By who? The Ku Klux Klan was it. They came in and they saved the day. And the point of that I'm saying is because to this day, you still see these mobs and these white mobs coming in to protect the neighborhoods, and we have to protect ourselves against them. That is still stuff that happened from the early 1900s. And the point I'm going to make is during times of slavery, white people weren't afraid of Black people. We fed the kids. We were hard workers. We were there every day. The only thing they were afraid of us is leaving. So how do you go from all being around all Black people all the time, never having a problem, to now being so afraid of them? And that's one of the things that we have to understand about policing. There's a long history of terror, And to this day, if it wasn't for cameras, people would still be oblivious. Like, no, that's not happening. Black people have been talking about Black people have been getting choked. Women, if you read the Baltimore police investigation by the FBI or the Department of Justice, women were being raped by police officers. Kids were being, I mean, it was just.
Well, this is something that I read the other day, that it was just hard to swallow, in the sense that in many states, it is not illegal for police to have sex with people in their custody.
Listen,
which I'm like, why does it need to be a specific law? And I get, in order for something to be illegal and charged as a crime and everything, I guess it's got to be on the books. But how is that not automatically rape? How is that not automatically, like, it just blew my freaking mind that this was something that was happening, documented, and the police, having gone through this experience and having it come out that they had sex, that it was, yep, we had sex with it. And there's not, like, you didn't lose your job, you don't go in a national database, you don't, like, what?
I am telling you, it's crazy, because the police have so much power. It's ridiculous. And this is why I tell people, you can't wait for it to happen to your family for you to care. And this is why over the last couple of years, man, people's eyes have been waking up. And it's just because if people really knew what was happening right in their not across the nation, right in their local municipality, people would be like, what? How many lawsuits are we paying? How many settlements did we take? This happened to a kid, to a mother, to a family. And my point is just saying this. It's not about picking with individual cops. I don't care about individual cops. I have friends who are cops. I could have been a cop. I was on a trajectory. I chose not to go that path, right? I have friends up in the federal.
And I have a similar story on that I applied to be a police officer, but I know one of the things, my wife was against it. I was starting up my staffing business at the time. But one of the things that sort of weighed on me was the exact scenario that police are in right now. What happens when there's a protest that I might even happen to believe in, but forget about that for a moment. Protest, which is an American right. And I am a police officer sworn to follow orders, right? I mean, it's that whole thing of sworn to uphold the law, but the law is the law of the land and the orders of the land. And you're going to be in that position where you may have to be, bearing down on a protest.
And let's go a step further. What happens when you are friends, right? And you're part of this family, and but then you see your family are breaking the law, and they tell you the day you open your mouth, when you're up against a bad situation on the streets, you're going to be alone. We're not going to come. There's a lot. I talk to my friends all the time. There's good cops definitely out there, but there's penalties. They will punish you so that you quit. That's the way.
You got a little bit of, and I know there's females on the, but you have that sort of boys club sort of thing where, it's a slippery slope, but, I'm not going to tattletale. You got the sports team mentality. You're not going to tattletale on it. And I can quickly see how that would go from being something where you would easily say, oh yeah. You're not going to, to now you're someplace totally different. And, I think it's really appropriate that the officers that were around, Officer Chauvin, who had his knee on George Floyd's neck, they did not protect and serve in that moment. They did not protect. And worst of all, they didn't protect Officer Chauvin. I don't think we talk about this enough as well, but, through a hateful act, through emotion that, whatever you think was going through Officer Chauvin's mind, whatever political side of that, wherever your mind is at, do you think Officer Chauvin wants his life to be like this now? Do you want him? I mean, I imagine this like going through and never being heard about, because there's lots of stories that weren't on the front paper news, but this is an act of violence. When you commit an act of violence like that, there's no one that's in and a part of that that's left unscarred. And I think it's just because it does an injustice to everyone when you let something like that happen.
So I feel let's give some context to Officer Chauvin. Number one, I feel like there's going to be a lot more information coming out, but Officer Chauvin should have never been Officer Chauvin. Right. He should have been Mr. Chauvin, because he had 17 counts against him in prior. And that's the problem sometimes in our police departments, that an officer can literally be written up.
Why did it allow to get to that point? Why was he let? This is somebody that shouldn't have been in that position, and I compare it, not to be, like cops are children or anything, but I compare it, to raising children. It's like, if you let them get away with something small, something big, something hurtful is going to happen.
And that's the point. The point is saying these unions, and the biggest issue are the unions that are so focused on membership that they're not caring about lives. And I used to belong to a union. I used to be a part of an AFT in New Jersey, and unions are essential in my opinion. But I feel like unions are really going to have to break away from the police unions, because their missions are totally different. And so
break it down on that, because I think that's something, and I know we talked about that beforehand, because I think people can really understand the gifts that unions have bestowed, especially on the American workforce. The things that unions have done in terms of number of hours that we work in the week, rights for workers. How does that differ from the story of police unions?
Yeah, so I think the unions are powerful, right? They allow collective bargaining. You get to have a powerful voice. You get to use it for political muscles, whatever way you have. And to be honest, I'm a big supporter of unions. I feel that the police unions need to be removed away from traditional unions that we support. It's because, number one, you are working for the state. When an officer puts on that badge and he walks out the house and you kill somebody, you are killed by the state. There's a whole nother bar to you. You're violated by the state. You have the full, whenever something happens to an individual by a police officer, you have the whole bearing of the state against that individual. It's not an individual person. If you're at if somebody who's cleaning your business hits you, you have an equal opportunity to engage that person to protect yourself without the full state of the law punishing you.
Well, let me say this, because I hear exactly what you're saying, but playing devil's advocate, don't teachers work for the state?
Yeah, that's the point I'm going to make. It's that you have a teacher who can hit you. You can protect yourself. Teachers don't have this extra protection like these law enforcers. Do you know if you poke an officer, you could go to jail, right? Yeah. So there's all these.
Yeah, that's called.
But more importantly, a teacher doesn't have a gun to kill you. A teacher doesn't have use of force training to choke you. These are things, there are protocols set up that teachers won't violate your constitutional rights. But the way America works, an officer can violate your constitutional rights, take away your human life, and guess what? Still go home and sip matas with his family and his friends. And my point is just saying this: unions have it set up that when an officer does something, they give them a window sometimes to not talk to anybody. Why? To get their stories right. Why? If something happened to a teacher, that moment, you ain't going home until you share what took place with you and that student. Something happened in any entity. Why do officers add those?
No, and I absolutely agree. I mean, this sort of thing, this is the sort of injustice, and I'm trying to wrap my head around the union thing, because I think there's a lot of work in getting into the solutions about these certain right. And I'm losing the words, but I know that there is an immunity. Do you know what I'm talking about? The immunity that police officers have
Yeah.
in certain situations. So
when they feel that their life is being taken, they can take a life. When they feel like
there was a word, and I just heard it, watching John Oliver's show and watching some other stuff. But there's a certain immunity that police officers, maybe somebody that's watching will be able to chat. And just while I'm mentioning folks that are watching, so you got Stephanie Monet who's watching. She's complimented. Wow, well said. Chanel, Janine. Wow, this Arcane guy is a very smart and intelligent, great guest. So what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, because I don't know if you're necessarily going to get rid of unions. I know there's a lot of talk about defunding police departments, which for certain police departments certainly seems like a really good idea, just in the sense of, once an institution with a legacy that is just so deeply ingrained.
So the goal is not to get rid of the union. What we're asking, and my ask is for the unions that work in tandem with the police departments to break that relationship. You're not pushing towards the same goal. Unions, we can't remove a union. The collective bargaining agreements are essential even for police officers. What we are saying is that there needs to be another light shed on beyond the collective bargaining and beyond the way you negotiate with the municipalities and all these other stuff and how you protect. There's a level of protection that officers have that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And then the unions they're not doing anti-racist trainings, right? They're not ensuring that there's transparency, right? They're not ensuring that why don't you?
Let's go back to the training. I'll put a pin in it, keep going, but we got to go back to the training. Yeah.
Why don't unions collectively, all police unions, say we will never have racist cops in our union? If you had that commitment, you would have citizens who say, we respect you. Every other union will tell you that. Every union will say we will respect the dignity of the communities we work with. But not police unions. They will stay silent even in the midst of a massacre.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. So I want to talk about training, but even before we get into training, just going to the crime scene. So talking about equal justice. So we have young black women and young black men killed on a statistical scale far beyond any other race in the U.S. Before you even get to that issue, unequal justice, any crime scene, anyone regardless, going back to what you were saying about the period for officers to get their story straight, that just would not be allowed for any criminal suspect. They're going to immediately be arrested, immediately be detained, and immediately questioned. Now there is, and I know this sort of gets into the legalese of it, and maybe you can shed some light for me on this, but I know that you do have the ability, if you're arraigned by the cops, to request a lawyer, and you do have the ability to remain silent. And obviously police, more so than the average citizen or suspect, understands their rights very closely because they're on the other side of the law. So how do we balance that out? Give a person their rights, including the officers involved, their rights, but also make sure that there is absolutely equal justice for each of us that's a regular citizen and for the police officer.
Yeah. So before I say this, I just want to make sure I give recognition to the Native American community, especially the indigenous community, because their numbers are very high with amount of people. Natives are killed by police, also raped by police. I mean, just across the board, we can't not acknowledge them, and we have to make sure we do that. But let's just talk about this. So we said we have these protections under the law, but when somebody is violated and they want to, you have to hire attorneys. So there's an economic issue right there,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
if you're given an attorney, now let's talk about the transparency. And this is one of the solutions is you have to remove the relationships between those who are defending you and those who are supposed to investigate and the officers. Number one, the reason why there has to be some level of independence. When you look at everybody should be studying the relationships of police officers on the local level. They are family, they are friends, they are goddaughters and godsons, and like they're such a family. More importantly, there's such disassociation between prosecutors and police officers and detectives and investigators and even judges. Like it's one big family. And that there's nothing wrong with
so I
situation.
absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And my sort of thinking around that is that in no situation should the same police department and should the same DA be responsible for investigating a police officer in their house. I know there are organizations that have internal affairs, and I imagine that that's a necessary thing, just like a business has hopefully a human resources department that goes after internal kind of challenges, right? But this is a whole nother ball of wax. And when you talk about family, when you talk about conflict of interest.
Yeah, I would say, I would go a step further and say internal affairs is not an effective tool for investigating officers.
If it was, we wouldn't be where we were today.
We would not be where we were. There has to be, and this is why we push on the local level for civilian review boards with the ability to subpoena, is because then you have members of the community who are on the board who can oversee in write-ups or investigate cases, allegations against officers, and then subpoena officers to give their testimonies and working with the council to make decisions to remove folks. The people have to get back into police business, because at this very moment, it is not working. And I would just say this, there are across the spectrums, right? When you hear people say abolish the police, that is, number one, the police didn't always exist in America. There were always issues with the police. That's why we always had new structures. I feel like we always get to this point where we say something isn't a radical idea, and then eventually we realize, like, all these the Department of Education and the environmental department and all these other things were once radical issues, and now they're normal. Social Security was radical. So my point is just saying this: it's that we have to figure out what the people need and what the people are asking for, and we have to do that. When you call and you say, my son is acting erratic, he hasn't taken his medication, he's walking around naked, you need somebody who is trained to deal with people with mental health issues, not somebody who's trained to kill, to be in the scene. And that's why we put an unfair burden on officers sometimes, because we expect officers to be able to be everything in the community.
All right, so I want to break down the problems, and again, I want to try to make sure that we are looking after some of the solutions. So accountability, right? I think that's the big one, and having, I don't know what your ideas around maybe having the FBI having a wing of their organization that just anytime somebody dies in police custody, that automatically, the FBI is brought in, which is external to the police department. I love your opinion on that, because I don't know what the ties are between the FBI and police departments, which I imagine in some cases are somewhat cozy. So do we need another organization there, or is that something that would be good? And then, for the reporting and tracking and national, is that the FBI, or is that a national coalition of civilian boards of review? And then I'd love it if you could talk just a moment. I'm writing notes down to try to keep us on base here, but I want to talk about accountability. I want to talk about abuse of power, because I don't think you're going to call the FBI in necessarily because a police officer inappropriately frisked somebody, but that definitely needs to be documented, addressed, and gone through. So your civilian report.
I would just say this: for many Black people, we don't need data. We have a whole lot of issues that just shares what's happening. But when you hear call for data, that's really for white folks, for white folks to get the picture. But I would just say
wait. Well, let me just push back on that. So when I'm talking about data is what I thought you were talking about before in terms of, okay, Officer Chauvin, why was he at this point? Why wasn't somebody keeping track of this? And why didn't that go to a civilian? Why was this guy still working as a police officer, right? So data in terms of if I did something in one department and now I'm transferring to another department, why do I get to go be a police officer at another department if I wasn't good enough to work at this other department because I got kicked out because there was all these complaints against me?
Yeah, I'm saying I agree. We're agreeing with that. We need that tracking. What I'm saying is, but if you were to go into the streets and you say, yo, how you feel about Officer Chauvin to a lot of people of color and young people about Chauvin, they would say, he's a piece of jack. He's a piece of trash.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying to you. And now, but you won't understand. You need the data. So I would just say we need to collect the data. That is number one. We need to know the arrests of what's happening locally. We need to know the stops. We need to know the use of force. In use of force, there's like 10 categories of use of force. And we need to know what uses of force are happening at every interaction. We talked about the Civilian Review Board. The most important part of the Civilian Review Board is the subpoena power and the ability to recommend officers go, and the power. If they don't have that power, you're really not.
So I know nothing about civilian review boards. Can you explain what a civilian review board is, how it's set up politically? And I got a comment from Marlene. I agree we need a community investigative board review to be involved with these complaints, right? So what is a community review board? Because before a lot of this stuff, I really hadn't heard of this beyond maybe some mentions in some TV programs, certainly city council kind of stuff, but I don't know what a review board is. I live in town of Mount Pleasant, probably somewhat similar to Roselle, New Jersey, in the sense that it's a smaller town. It's not one of the big cities. I live relatively close. So how does that work for, we have a police department for Mount Pleasant. And then obviously I can go 40, miles south of me, and then I'm in New York City. And then there's I think it was like a $6 billion a year funded police department, something like that. So what does that look like on scale in the different places?
So I would say the civilian review boards is complex because when we're talking about from a local level, it has to be localized depending on the government structure and the issues that's happening.
Are they in place?
Say it again.
Are they in place?
No, they have to be created. And so what I'm saying is there's no one cookie cutter for everyone.
Is there
it's an entity that's created. It's a board that's created.
Where is it? What I'm asking is
by the municipality.
And where have we seen examples of these? Are there civilian?
Right now in the city of Newark, there's a prime example of a civilian review board.
So talk to us about that. Talk to us about how that works.
I'm going to try to explain it for broad terms. Also, I'll explain the complexity. The civilian review board is a way of the community being involved in policing and police complaints that come up, that arise. Because historically, like we said, people will file a complaint, you'll do the internal investigation, internal affairs, and nothing will happen, right? And I know that a prime example because back about 20 years ago, little less than 20 years ago, when I was in college, three of my friends were falsely arrested by officers, right? We filed internal affairs. It went nothing. We tried to meet with the police, the chief. It went nowhere, right? So we went through this long process. They said, how do you want to plead? We said, no, we're not. We didn't do anything. They literally arrested us after our finals, and they said that we were standing on the sidewalk. Make a long story short, we fought this whole process. And after 3 years or 2 years, whatever, we end up winning because they admitted that they were wrong the whole night and they dropped everything. But the point is, if we didn't do that, I think if we didn't stand on our guns, it would have been terrible. But the point you were saying,
well, and let me stop on that, because I mean, I just think about the time involved. not to get too deep into this, but I mean, it speaks to the larger issue. You know, I just watched Mercy the other day, and you got folks that are on death row. 1 out of 10 of every person on death row, forget how many are probably innocent, but 1 out of 10 has been proven innocent. These are people that they put on death row. They said, you are guilty and you are going to die for your crimes. You are 100%. We know you're the one that did it. You did it. You're going to die for your crimes. We are going to sentence you to the maximum justice that there is. And 1 out of 10 times we're wrong. Completely wrong. Absolutely wrong. And then who knows how many times beyond that, but those are the times that we can prove and paid the money and did all the things that we had to do to prove that your legal system was completely wrong in this matter. So how do you pay back somebody for 30 years of their life that they spent wrongly accused? It might have been, I don't know how long, I think you said 3 years. How do you pay somebody back for that?
I'm telling you, we were in school. I was at Rowan University. My friend was at the University of New Haven. My other friend was at Jersey City University. And we just could not believe that was happening to us. But we knew, hey, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, we're never pleading guilty unless we did something and we didn't do anything wrong. But there was nothing there to protect it. There was no outside entity, and we didn't know anything about the media at the time. But my point is saying this, the Civilian Review Board will be an entity of people from the community that oversees this process. And when reports and complaints come in, they actually oversee the complaints. They help with the investigation process. And also they get testimony from the officers. And so they get to pull up the files of the officers. They get to do a lot of stuff. But when about Newark, what happened with Newark is as they started to create the process, the Attorney General for New Jersey got involved and said, no, we don't want you to have all this power. And it's in Supreme Court at this very moment in New Jersey to determine, does the citizens of Newark have the right to oversee these processes because they're being challenged by the Attorney General office. Why is that happening? Because the unions don't want transparency. They don't want their officers being held accountable. If you and I had a business, right? And when we have a business, we have to report our taxes. We have to be transparent. When complaints come in, we have to abide by these laws. There has to be transparency, right? And we know that there's ways to get around that and these non-disclosure agreements, but even those can be challenged. And right now there's not. And so that's why I'm asking, everybody needs to be involved in getting a civilian review board so that our point come from the community. There has to be no conflict of interest with family members or with the police departments, and that they can provide another batch of help for people who are trying to get justice. And these are essential. They're basic, essential components of justice. And so I just feel like the other part I was going to mention is a lot of these communities that people are consistently complaining about, right? About crime. There's a correlation of crime and economics. Every time you see high crime, it's always a lack of resources that exist in these communities. And this is why people are saying police don't work, because every time there's a lack of resources and a lack of economics, and there's high, the minimum wage is low and the median incomes are low and healthcare is not present for family members. And it's just a whole lot of, it's just a ball of a bunch of mess. You're going to have crime. And so police are used to solve those issues when in fact, we should be addressing those issues with sources, right? We should be making sure that people have jobs. We should be making sure that people have healthcare. We should be making sure that there's tutors. We should be making sure that there's an economic engine happening in those communities. But because police departments have multi-millions and billion-dollar budgets, do you realize there's some police departments around this country who have larger budgets than some countries' military? But my point is saying, why don't we reinvest those dollars? The research will show you the more you infuse dollars, right, through the communities, and you make sure that they're hitting mothers and they're hitting fathers and they're hitting people in the community, and you're giving that into a nice little engine, you will reduce crime. Even with gangs, the research will show you Most people in gangs are not shooting their communities. There's always one or two, but there's ways to engage gang.
Right. And this is a worldwide thing. People join gangs because they feel desperate. They feel like they need protection. They don't join a gang because they want to be violent. They don't join. I mean, I'm not saying, I can't describe the motives of every single individual ever, but for the most part, when you go to the statistics, if you give somebody a book and resources versus a gun and something to sell, they're going to take the book and the resources just about every single time. Who wouldn't? You go to a criminal organization, you go sign up in an army, you go sign up in a armed force, right? And this is not United States, this is the world.
Yeah.
If somebody's giving you food and somebody's taking care of you and they say, okay, we're going to do that for you, and you're going to put this gun in your hand and you're going to go do this for us, you say yes, because you don't feel like you have any other choice.
Or the opposite, right? Look at the U.S. military. When we go into other countries, when there's chaos, what we say is, listen, we're going to pay you. We're going to put you on salary. We're going to build you a school. We'll build you a bridge. And what we do is we infuse the economics in that community. And because we're trying to decrease the crime, we're trying to decrease. So we know the strategies exist, but we don't apply them in our domestic policies. We don't apply them into our communities. Why? Because of white supremacy and racism. We can't remove this thing. Do you realize that welfare was such a popular program until the face of welfare started to become black folks? And then they said, not the fact.
It's still a popular program. You can't tell the poor white folks in this country that you're going to cut back on their food stamps.
But the narrative is,
I don't know what the dog whistling and the craziness, like, I don't understand the politics of it, because you got red states that are so dirt poor.
Exactly.
But they support these policies because they feel like, we better than those folks over there. They're trying to take some of ours, and you got the have-nots just fighting each other.
And that's the point I'm trying to make. The point is saying that the vast majority of white people need welfare. They're on welfare. But because when the narrative, the face changes, the support for it drops. And that's why you have people working against their own interests. No, we don't want Obamacare. But in Kentucky, they changed the name to Obamacare, and everybody said, this is the best thing in the world. Yes. And so this is the problem. This is why we can't go around tackling white supremacy and racism. And from a person of faith, I always tell people, white supremacy and racism is not just what you do to somebody, but it destroys you from the inside out. The fact that you can actually look at another human being and think that they're less than, that says something that's wrong in your brain. Yeah. Right. And then the fact is that God, in any one of the Jewish texts and Christian texts and Muslim texts and Sikh texts and Baha'i faith, there's nothing that talks about there's a superior being, right? There's superior race. So anytime somebody's practicing these things, you're going up against your own faith. And this is why we need to continue to talk about the issues of data, collecting, civilian review board, holding police accountable, body cameras, dealing with the unions. But we have to constantly do the micro level in our families and our friends and correcting and making sure that we're working on ourselves. I tell people, especially my white brothers and sisters, if you are seriously focused on changing this culture, you have to take an undoing racism class. It's helpful. And brother, it's like you and I. We have our own patriarchal views about women because it's part of our society. Every day we have to undo our sexism. We have to undo our views and our actions towards that. If we're not, then we're part of the problem. So we have to have the same thing going on with racism and white supremacy. It's the only way that we're going to get back to the basics and fundamentals of this country where all of our constitutional rights are protected.
All right, so let's talk about solutions. So, you pulled down a list. My big four that I have down here are definitely national accountability. Two, the creation of these civilian review boards and empowering them. Right. Three, the rules, just the rules that guide interactions with the police definitely need a redo, right? You know, it needs to be a much more respectful thing, a much more equal justice thing. One set of justice shouldn't exist for the citizen on one side of the law, and then another set of rules for the other side of the law. That just doesn't work. And then responsibilities, which talks to the issue of, you know, should a police officer be called out because there is a mentally ill person, or because there is a cat in a tree, or because there you know, is a puppy that needs to be, you know, caught in the street, which, you know, we've just tasked. Those are sort of silly kind of things that I mentioned, aside from the mentally ill person, which is just something that we know we have a mental health issue in this country, and the fact that we're policing it rather than actually treating it with healthcare and care in general exacerbates the issue. So what can we be doing on the individual voter advocacy, education level? I definitely heard you on undoing racism level, but in terms of advocacy and what we should be doing in terms of local and national politics, what would you suggest there?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I feel that all these elections, don't get caught up in just the national election. There's a lot of local elections happen. There's a lot of district attorney elections happening. Whoever's watching this just needs to just stay focused on your local level, because it's the local level where you live. Sometimes that's where the injustice is happening, right? So that's the number one.
Let me add something here just to get your opinion on this, because I live in a smaller town, and a lot of times when we're voting, there's one checkbox, which means the person that's running is running unopposed, which, you know, we talk about people feeling a lack of power in this country. They feel like the choices are being made for them. And that's a serious way where, in fact, they are, because you aren't giving option. I mean, yes, there's the write-in, you know, option, but effectively, because of the way we vote, because of the way we practice politics, the choices are being made for us, and which is one way to look at it. On the other side, and I'm hoping that you'll speak to this, maybe some of us should be running for office and providing another box to check. Absolutely.
I mean, number one, it is your responsibility to be engaged and active in your community. I continue to tell people this. You don't have to know everything to get involved. You just have to care. That's the number one thing, right? And for what we always say is, the people who care, those are the ones who take the backseat, and the people who don't care are the ones pushing the agenda. And this is why sometimes when people say, well, listen, these people don't care. Yeah, because you didn't step up. And so we just need to remember this. It takes a group. Sometimes it takes the simple thing of, if you see somebody in your community who's passionate, who loves this, who's speaking out, go up to that person, say, have you considered running for office? Most people are never asked. Most people run for office. I was in office for 9 years, and the only reason I ran was because somebody said, have you considered running? I was like, what is that? I don't even know what that means. So number one, that's the important thing. Number two, it's demanding to know the agenda of the elected official. Stop allowing them come to your congregations and your businesses without knowing what they stand for and what they support on a broad range of issues, from the local level down to the state or to the national level. Number three is you have to stay in focus on the national level. There's a presidential election happening in a couple of months. I'm a Democrat. I am not being full transparent. I will never vote for Trump, right? That's just my opinion, right? But I just think that people need to know what's happening. The fourth part is young people. Millennials now surpass baby boomers in terms of vast population. But the issue is millennials haven't been registered to vote. They need to still register them. So we need we need people who are going to come up and support campaigns. You know, for 2024, I'm running a campaign to register as many millennials as possible throughout the country. It's important because they're the ones that's hurting. When you look at the silent generation set up the baby boomers, to do well. They gave them Social Security, they gave them the green, they gave them all these things. But the baby boomers did not set the millennials up to do well. And I know Generation X is always left out, but I'm just saying, so right now, we just need millennials to get up, to know that this is your country, to register to vote, encourage your people, get out there, speak up. And then there's the other things, back to policing, the qualified immunity, that's what it's called. It's the bill that allows officers to get away with the killings that we see. There's a bill right now in the House of Representatives. That bill needs to pass, and it changes the law that says that an officer can be held accountable. And then the other point is that there's other two pieces that I want to make. It's that there's a group of Black Lives Matter in New York that are promoting this policy, and I think it's important. It's calling for all officers to immediately offer assistance if somebody says that they're having an issue. If they can't breathe, you have to offer medical assistance. If they said, I'm choking, whatever the case is, you have to, right? And the last thing is, if they present false reports, they should immediately be removed. That is something that we need to have. These basic things don't exist.
Wow.
I mean, I swear, it's like the basic things about life. Do you realize if a doctor doesn't help somebody out, they will get their license removed?
Yes.
And we talked about this. Do you realize that all officers are not even licensed? There's not a licensing process in all states. New Jersey is just about to begin a license process. That means the same way a beautician has a license and a barber has a license, law officers are going to have a license so that your license can be pulled from you when you get engaged in something.
I thought this was interesting, and this goes back to, because I know I had said we were going to talk about it, training. So something that has definitely made a difference in NYC, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson. So I was reading an essay that he had put out recently on this whole just political unrest and all the attention around it right now, but talking about his own personal experience. And this is an astrophysicist, right? So he's a Black man that's an astrophysicist, and dealing with, like many Black men, the fear of just going out and having an interaction with a police officer, which, for myself, that I don't live in that skin and I don't drive by a police officer fearing for my death, but understanding and being able to empathize, I can't imagine it. And especially when you are a public servant and you are somebody that has as many degrees on your wall, it shouldn't matter. But I think everybody can identify once you reach a certain place in your life in terms of age and career, you feel like you shouldn't have to worry about certain things. But for some people, that is not the case. And he was talking about the difference, because I think the national average is something like 4 weeks and NYC having 6 weeks of training. Certainly, to your point, having a certification, a licensing process makes a lot of sense for a person that walks around with the ability and the option to kill somebody at any moment because they are carrying not only a gun, because you can get a gun and as a citizen, but a badge, right? The power, the authority, the idea that this person is supposed to protect other people, and that they have the ability to take lives. Meanwhile, our doctors that have the ability to save lives, they have to be licensed in order to work on you and help you, but you don't have to be licensed or have a degree behind you to take a life, and that just doesn't seem right.
Absolutely, you're 1,000% correctly. You're 1,000% correct, and I feel like the trainings are going to need to happen. But remember this, as you know, if you hired somebody to work with you and you're training them, but there's some things you just can't train on.
Yeah.
You can't train to be on time, right? They're showing 30 minutes late to the training. That's money that you're losing, especially when you're running a small business, right? There's certain things that you can't train. You can't train somebody how to be enthusiastic about the work you do, right? You can't train that. And my point is saying training only goes far. So we have to train, we have to do some of these trainings, but we have to deal with some of the core issues. Number one,
I don't understand. I don't understand how. I mean, I guess I can understand. You know, I have 130 part-time staff, and we have a procedure for bringing people into the company.
yeah,
But I went through. You said you had gone through some of the processes, or at least some of the beginning steps of becoming a police officer. You know, I did the application, I did some of the examinations, I did some of the interviews, and I think I stopped short of getting to the point where they might do like a psych evaluation of me.
yeah.
At that point, I just bowed out. Spousal pressure and starting a business was like, and thinking about things like, I don't want to be in the position where I'm ordered to, come down on a protest or something like those. Those things definitely weighed on me. And it was a part of my decision-making process. But they're extremely thorough in their process. So I don't understand.
But remember, I'm not talking strictly of, so there's the ideal of being a police, but I'm talking about, do you love people? Do you care about the community? Are you afraid of Black people?
I mean, they go through so much stuff. And to your point, I feel like they because of things that happen in people's past, criminal stuff. So this is like economic injustice, right? So how does a community that wants to be a part of the policing community, when that same policing community X them out from the beginning because of, inappropriate policing to begin with, right? That's part of the thing, right? So that's, again, going back to the political thing of like, we only have so many boxes to check because certain people have been taken out of the process unwillingly. But, I'm just speaking to the fact that there's a super thorough process, but somehow these folks, like you're saying, that don't have a love, at least for certain people, right? And you have white officers and Black officers, and you have this argument. I saw this on social media, and I don't think it's an uncommon thing. How can the police be racist if Black and Asian and Native American and Indian police officers are on the police force too? And then we go back to some of the comments that we had before from some of the folks watching, talking about it's blue against Black and it's a blue family.
Yeah.
But there is definitely racial bias, and there is definitely folks that are in the system, as using your words, infiltrated the police force.
And again, so when we talk about Vietnam, right? It's like you could, as an individual military officer, you couldn't change the path of the mission. You had to follow the mission, right? And so that I equate that to systemic policing. You're not going to be an individual cop who comes into a police department and you're going to dismantle all the racist structures and structures of white supremacy. You're going to try. You're going to get pushed back. You're going to be told if you don't stay in your lane, then we're going to be leaving you dry. And then you're going to realize I came here to do my job and get a check for my family. And then that superhero of changing the day now drops down to a person who ends up staying silent when things are happening. And my point is saying we're not talking about individual cops. If we talk about individual cops, we miss the picture. We're talking about a structure within the police department since at birth that was unfair to Black people, period, point blank. And this is the stuff that we got to continue to deal with.
No, and it was part of my thought process. Just you saying that, going back to thinking about being a part of a police force, I was like, I think of myself as a pretty moral and righteous person, feeling the way that I do, that we are all equal, and we are all. I mean, to me, I very much a core part of my being is that we are all the same. We are all part of the same.
That's what we got to get
human family, right?
And that's why we're doing that work, so we can get to that ideal right there. That's why we're doing this work. Right. If we had the transparency, if we had the accountability, if we removed all the races, if we fund the communities the way we have, we will get to where you're at. But at this very moment, it's not working that way. And
right. Well, and just going back to what you were saying is that, when I was thinking about going to the police department, a big part of my thinking was, well, if I see something that's going down, And this is part of my thinking process as I was applying for the police department. If I see something that's going down, am I going to have the strength to deal with the red tape policies? You know, because you come into a police department, you don't come in as captain, you don't come in as you know, chief of police. You come in as whatever your role is. So you gotta play your role, play your part, pay your dues, and then you get to step up the ladder. But what sacrifices do you have to sort of pay into that systemic, right, injustice in whatever way that it plays out within a department in order for you to get someplace to actually change something? Can you deal with it? Can you deal with the red tape? All of that was going through my mind in applying to the police department.
So let's jump back to the prison system real quick. And I know we're over. You just tell me where you want to cut this off.
Yeah. We're good.
Look at this. How are drugs getting into the prison? How are people getting clothes from the outside in the prison? How are money being filtered all throughout the prison? How are these things happening? And so again, when we step back, we say,
right, because this just isn't HBO. This is real life. I mean, we see it played out on, because I haven't been incarcerated, so I wouldn't know firsthand. I just see what I see on you know, Orange is the New Black.
I know firsthand. I'm literally telling you, I have friends of mine who took stances in the police department because it was other officers bringing in the drugs. It was other individuals bringing in boots and clothes and working with the other. Man, I'm telling you, this system is. Chris Rock always said this. Chris Rock said this. He's one of my favorite comedians. He said, if people really understood how rich the rich is, he said there would be a uprising overnight. He said people don't realize the disparity between the wealthy and the poor. And what I'm saying is, if we shine the light in our criminal justice system, in our policing system, people will say, what the heck? Do you realize if we had a national database to look at complaints at every single police department, if we had a national database to see the amount of lawsuits and settlements that were happening, do you realize people will say, no, this is not America?
So why don't we have that? Let's talk to that. Why don't we have that?
You ready? I'm like a broken record. The police unions don't want it. The police unions are focused on getting the money from membership that they do not want to lose any officer, regardless of what the officer has done. So you have the economic side of the police union.
But I don't think well, tell me about this, because I haven't examined this and you have. What are the heads? There's not one head of a police union, right? There's, I would imagine that each.
No, there's heads.
Is it 50 different states? Is there 50 heads? Is it 5? Who are we talking about here?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert, but in every union there's a head, and you remember there's
so how many police unions are there? Is there one for every department?
It's like, remember, it's a union, so you have a local that's attached to a broader branch that's attached to a national organization, right? You have the local, like in my town, you have the Roselle educational. The education union, but they're charged to a state, that's charged to a national. A lot of those structures are important. What I'm saying to you is this: when we were working on some policies, we would meet individual officers who said, yeah, that sounds good. What you guys are talking, body cameras. It was like, yeah, body cameras, that's not bad. Yeah, we need this. We're trying to strengthen the relationship in our local level. But do you know that unions are set up that individual officers can't speak? That only the one head of the union can speak when it comes down to these issues? Like, you'll never see multiple voices in the union speaking on certain issues. So in New Jersey, the PBA, you won't find a bunch of officers in the PBA speaking out.
This is sort of a separate issue, but I've noticed lately on TikTok. So this I know this is sort of off wing, but bear with me. There's a point to it. I've noticed, because I think there's a general rule or principle that officers can't really speak, like you say, in uniform, right? They can't go and like off the job, go and, you know, in the uniform and speak out on something. I think that's a rule, right? Does that make sense?
I don't know all the rules. What I'm based on our experience, some officers said they couldn't speak out based on the structure of the union, and that applies.
I think there's definitely rules around. I have to look it up.
But remember this, okay? But let's just say that they take off the uniform, and some of them, you run the risk of being alienated if you speak out.
Right.
It's back to that culture again.
But I think it's, you know, on the legal side of it, I think exactly what you're talking about. So it's interesting. And the reason I bring up TikTok is because I'm seeing a lot of police officers on TikTok where I don't see a lot of police officers on necessarily Facebook or any other medium, but I see officers on TikTok. Now, a lot of them are just doing dances and stuff, but some are actually speaking out and speaking out specifically in the moment on George Floyd and the related issues around the protests and what we're talking about today. So it's sort of interesting that sort of seems to be a platform. I encourage people to sort of look out, you know, it's a searchable platform to sort of see what police are saying, because there are a lot of police speaking up about the injustice and the fact that not every police officer is on the same page. I say all that to say these voices need to be brought to bear because they have to be heard. And a union at the end of the day needs to support the full body of police, not just one head of the police. So I'm wondering, in terms of our organizing, what we have to do in order to shape what the unions look like going forward.
Yeah, I would say that the union fight is going to be a whole nother conversation, because it's a very tedious battle to talk about what exactly we need and how on the local level, statewide level, and also on a national level.
Because so many of the laws and rules are specific to each state and county and all that jazz, right?
Yeah, because for me, it's like we have to distinguish, and all these policies that we've been talking about are nothing that we're just pulling off of the thin air. Like, we've been researching these for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. And so I would say the reason why you're starting to see more officers speak out and more people take hard stances at this moment, we're in an unprecedented time. We had a police department that was burned down. When's the last time you've seen that in America? And it wasn't like like one of those movies where it's like the local sheriff with 3 people in a room, right? They burnt down the prison, right? And officers and officers know this, and even the military knows this. You can prop up yourself and take a stand, but then there's a time to retreat.
Where was the police department? Is that Minneapolis?
Yeah, Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And the point is saying they understand that the outrage and the pain is so intense that they're even becoming a threat, right? And what I mean by threat, not individual officers, meaning like this is the first time where people are talking about reforming police departments, defunding police departments, focusing on unions, right?
And in Minneapolis, you know, notably so, and you know, reported in the news that the city council has moved to are committed to defunding the Minneapolis Police Department. So they have made that decision, and they're going to move to some sort of new model of policing for their community.
Yeah. And so I'm just saying that we just need to ride this wave. The police know, a lot of individual officers know the pain in the community. They know the mistrust in the community. You can hear Black people talk to you about when they drive down the car. I mean, that was normal for we talk about the talk. Like, my mother used to always give us the talk. If you were a friend of mine, we were on a bike, whether we were in a car, she would always say, all right, if the cops pull you over, this is what you're going to say. This is what you're not going to do. If you go into the store, this is what we would always get the talk. There was another conversation when was the first time you had a gun pulled out on you. These are conversations happening within the Black community that a lot of other communities are not happening. And I'm not saying it's only Black folks. I'm saying at this very moment, the conversations are happening. And when those voices are happening, we can't ignore them, because when you ignore the voice, you get what you see right now. This is just what you see happening in this country is voices being ignored for structural.
For anyone that doesn't know the talk, because it was not a part of my upbringing, right? It was not a part of what my father told me. My daughter read the book and we picked it out. My 13-year-old and 12-year-old picked it out for last Wednesday's movie night. The Hate You Give, very, very powerful movie and speaks exactly to the talk. So anybody that doesn't know what the talk is, I suggest you see that movie because as you said it now, and my son, I mean,
yep, you're gonna have to have the talk with him. How old is he?
Well, my oldest son that's biracial, he's 22, and I don't see him a lot. So I imagine his folks, his grandparents and whatnot have schooled him on things if he hasn't already been schooled. But my son during that movie was in tears because the father in the story, in just a situation where he was trying to protect his family, walks outside of a diner, and then the police just go beyond. Just there wasn't a need for that, and I could see myself in a similar situation where police ask me what happens, and it's just at that. But instead of it just being a conversation, he was forced up against the glass where his family was sitting. My son was in tears. I was in tears. My son was in tears. You know, can you imagine? And we were watching a movie, and that's sort of what the point I'm trying to make here is that this is folks' reality. And I you know, for folks that haven't been through this, for folks of a different shade of skin than yours, Arcane, that just have no real base of understanding this. My son was in tears watching the movie. It wasn't, you know, it's based on a real story, based on many real stories. Imagine if that's happening to you and your family. And I have so many people that are on Facebook. This is being broadcast on Facebook. So maybe there's a chance that one of them are going to watch it, that are placing these sort of ignorant comments on Facebook. So everything from, you know, promoting the hate that Trump spews towards Black and brown people and is somehow not being held accountable for his racism, dog whistling, and just inordinate support of white supremacy and racism in this country, to whatever her name is, Candace, being held up as somebody that, you know, a champion of conservative rights, to, you know, I just got a video sent to me that I'm not even opening because I'm sure they have picked out the one brown person that has a conservative worldview that supports the other side of seeing things, which to me is not the other side. There's right and wrong when it comes to treating people humanely and with love. And if you are on the side where you're treating somebody humanely and with love and care, you're on the right side. And if you are not, then you're on the wrong side. And that is about as black and white as you can make it.
And the challenge that people have to remember is just because you are Black doesn't mean that you are not part of perpetuating white supremacy. This is what people have to realize. Remember this, and again, historically, I want to give some context to it. The reason why you have some of these challenges in the community, because remember, during the times of slavery, white masters used some Black people to spy on who were planning the uprisings. They used other Black folks to report and do and quelch and do all this other good stuff. That's a long history in America of Black folks being used to oppress other Black folks. And so we're not surprised when you see Black officers doing exactly what historically has been done to us, right? And the same thing with voices not being able to meet the community with the pain. And so I would just say this: it's easy to just grab a Candace Owens and just kind of put this out, but also you just got to remember her whole economic means is based on her doing exactly what she does. She makes a lot of money, she gets a lot of access, and And until we see her economic,
yeah, and I feel like we do just a disjustice even mentioning her name. You know, this I compare to any other kind of struggle that we have. You know, take it to the environment, right? We have an overwhelming, 90+% of the world's scientists that say, we are endangering our world with global warming, with what we're polluting with and putting into the air and the things that we're doing. And then somebody, because they have an obvious economic, tie and conflict of interest, comes with this one scientist out of the woodwork that conflicts 90% of the world, and we're going to pay attention to them. Why are we doing that? So don't listen to the one voice that is walking against the crowd. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't listen to somebody's view, but we certainly shouldn't be holding it higher than all of the many voices, all of the great many people that have education, that have worked in the causes. It pains me when you have somebody that's held up, that is speaking because they have a platform and because they've been given a platform, but they don't have the years of work. Even things like people criticizing Hillary Clinton. I don't care which way you feel about Hillary Clinton, but when you demagogue Hillary Clinton and put her down and say that she's da 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 without acknowledging the years of work that she put in, not only before her husband was president of the United States, but afterwards, criticize her positions, talk about like what, but this is a public servant. This is somebody that actually put the work in. And when you hold somebody's word that is only worked for themselves, only worked on their own interests and their own behalfs over that, you got to question it. It's an act of ignorance to believe their word over somebody that's been working on your behalf. Whatever you think their political interests lie, like it gets into such bad water. So I really, I want to give you the full last word here and give you a platform to talk about, how people can support you and what you're doing, Arcane. But I say all that to say you're somebody that's worked in the community. Don't take what I'm saying, because I haven't worked and done the work in places. I've certainly done the nonprofit thing and been on education, but I would much rather somebody listen to you, Arcane, than somebody that just comes out of the blue, hasn't put the work in, hasn't put the time in, and for whatever reason, somebody is lending credibility to that voice instead of somebody that's been in the political system and actually put the work on the ground. You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I mean, number one, I just want to thank you for hosting this. I mean, these are very important conversations that people need to have. And we need to continue happening, because I think these happen, but then we take these breaks. So we just need to constantly.
Let's talk about that, because in how people should be getting involved with you. I also want to talk about, because this is the solution. Like, this is our moment right now. So I don't want this to stop. You see all these chants, right? No justice, no peace, but suddenly there's no justice, and then there's peace again. So listen, if you're in the streets, if you're typing on Facebook, no justice, no peace, let's push forward. Let's get the justice and not stop. I mean, and it's always a constant struggle, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. So talk us down that path. How do we stay and create sustainable involvement for our communities?
So I think it's important that, again, I'm saying you can do your part. No matter who you are, what age you're in, what groups you belong to, whether you're white, you're black, or you're part of another group, you can do your part. And what does that mean is, number one, start with basic research. You need to be Googling and Binging and getting the information you need to doing the background, understanding some of the histories, all this conversation that we're saying. If there's some things that didn't click, do your research. Number two, figure out what's happening on your local level. What's happening with police? What's happening with your politics? What's happening with the fusion of both of them? What are the marginalized voices saying in your community? What are Black folks? What are Indigenous folks? What are Latinos and Black and brown people and women saying in your community? Any of them feeling alienated? And then laying out your plan for that. If you need help thinking through some processes, please go to Savviors.com, SAVVIORS.com, or you can go to org, same thing. We're working on the org side. And get with me if you want to send me email, info@Savviors, SAVVIORS.org. I work with so many nonprofit organizations doing this work in the state of New Jersey and around the country. So we just want to encourage people just to come by and don't feel like you're alone. No one's alone. We're here to guide you. We're here to help you thinking through grassroots campaigns, or if you want to see how your business can really give back to the community to show that you're standing in solidarity. We can come up with some strategies where you can meet up with organizers and support them. And there's some people out there, you're not going to be on the streets. You're not going to be tweeting. You're not going to be sending out emails. That's perfectly fine. But you want to give money. We want to kind of work with you to figure out what organizations you can give and who organizers you can give to who are doing the work that you want to see. Every financial means are so important to changing our world. And the civil rights movement have it. Other Black Lives Matter organizations have it. People who are doing this work on a legal level, the ACLU, the period, point blank. Everybody needs your support. But at the end of the day, and again, I always say, if you are a faith leader, it's so important that you are preaching and teaching and articulating your faith tradition as it relates to justice in the world. You should be writing local articles. You should be writing manuals and quotes and quoting some of the verses of prophets and what they talked about justice. We need to get as many faith communities and faith voices out there speaking up, standing up together as one family. And as we said, our goal is to the point where we get to the point where we say we are seeing each other as one people. At this moment, it's not, but we're going to work our behinds off and we have to fight our tails off until we get to that goal. And I just want to say I love you. No matter what you do, do it in the spirit of love, because the hurt and the pain that's out there, people want to know that they care about. They want to know that they're loved. So whether you're looking at the business side, you're looking at the community side, you're looking at the politics, everybody's hurting. And so we need to make sure that we're showing love. But it can't be a love that's rooted in people's oppression. It has to be a love that's rooted in people's liberation. People don't want to hear that fake love about peace and quietness and silence. They want to hear that you're behind them when they speak up. They want to know that you're behind them when they take a stand. They want to know that love means that we're willing to sacrifice for each other. And so again, I just wanted to encourage you all to be part of the solution and not the problem.
That's great. I gotta say, we're talking about some heavy issues. We're talking about some big challenges, but it was an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you about these big challenges and problems. It gives me hope that there's many of these conversations happening all over the country and in fact all over the world, and that they will continue, like you say, till we have a better accountability, better justice, civilian review boards, a change of the rules to allow for equal justice and equality under our government, where supposedly every man is created equal, but we're not treated that way. And that's something that definitely needs to change. I'll let you have the last word here, Arcane. Why don't you tell people one more time how they can get in touch with you and what you're working on so that they can help you, and I'll let you sign off and say goodbye to everybody.
All right. Again, thank you again, Brother Cameron, for just allowing me this opportunity and just to talk with you freely about a lot of these tough issues. I just want to get encourage people, if you need to get in contact with me, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Archange Antoine. That's at Archange Antoine. You can follow us, Savviors, at Savviors, on Twitter, on Instagram, and also on Facebook. And again, we are trying to encourage community leaders and also people in the business community as well as politics to really be part of the solution. There's ways that you can give back. And again, if you want to be, if you want to support individuals or organizations financially, let us know what state you're part of so we can connect you to different organizations that are doing this work, or we can help you come up with different plans on how you can offer grants to different organizations that are doing this work. And again, I just want to say we love you all and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being part of the solution and not the problem.
Thank you. Hold on 1 second, Arcane.
Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T.